Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Philosophical Jew podcast. I am honored to have on today one of the rabbis in the world with one of the best accents I have ever heard, Chacham Rabbi Dr. Nathan Lopez Cardozo. Rabbi, would you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you first of all for inviting me. I was born in Amsterdam, in Holland, in a very assimilated mixed marriage. Father Jewish, mother not Jewish. I was born in 1946, the year after the Holocaust was over. And my mother was not Jewish, but very much part of the Jewish community in Amsterdam. And when I started to study philosophy, and especially the philosophy of Spinoza, who is one of the great Dutch Jewish philosophers, people will probably not agree with me on the word Dutch, or better on the word Jewish. I got an interest in philosophy, and I got an interest in what the Jewish tradition was basically responding to Spinoza's objections against the Jewish tradition. And from there, I started to study more and more about the Jewish tradition, also reading Spinoza, from there to other philosophers. And so I got more and more involved in this, slowly but surely. And when I was 16, 17 years old, I decided to become fully Jewish. Until that, I was half Jewish, let's say, from father's side, but not from mother's side. And after I did my high school, I said to myself, I need to know more about it. So I went to a yeshiva in England, which at the time was the most famous yeshiva in Europe, in Gateshead, which is in the north of England. And to my own surprise, I stayed there for 8 years. So I got a lot of knowledge from some outstanding Talmudists and thinkers. And then I did my PhD in philosophy, and I started to teach. When I came to Israel, I started to get involved in Baal Teshuvah Yeshiva. And after many years, I left there again and started my own institute, and have been traveling around the world for many years, speaking in universities and Jewish study programs, in outreach programs, in synagogues. And I've been doing that till before the corona. Today I'm nearly 9 years old. So I take it a little easier in that sense of the word, but still very involved in writing. And I just published another book, this time on Vayikra, on the third book of the Torah, Leviticus, called Cardozo on the Torah. I already published Bereshit, Genesis, and afterwards Shemot, Exodus. And now we did Vayikra, and I hope to finish the series of 5 books with Ma'amarim, with essays, philosophical essays on the different books of the Torah. Yeah, each one is a parasha in itself. I have been very involved in Jewish philosophy, but also in Halakha, in trying to make Halakha relevant, Jewish law relevant to today's Jewish and non-Jewish society, especially in Israel, in the state of Israel. And I'm still writing on that, on these topics, and teaching as much as I can wherever I'm being invited. That in very short.
Well, Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cardozo, can I call you Rabbi Cardozo? Is that okay?
Or that's how people call me.
That's great. What a fascinating background. I think there's actually a biography of your life on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yes.
So I will link that in the description if people want a longer exposition. You have truly a fascinating background. So when I started reading up on you myself, I was, sort of fascinated. I don't really see a lot of rabbis who are invested in Spinoza and somehow facilitate it into their understanding and of Jewish thought. So it was really a very unique perspective to see.
By the way, there's also a documentary about my life also on my website. So if you want, you can send the link to our viewers as well.
For sure, I will link the website and the YouTube channel, so that people can find you in multiple locations and find your work there as well. One of the works which we're primarily going to discuss today, the work which familiarized myself with your work, is Jewish Law as Rebellion. I'll link it in the description as well, and its subtitle is A Plea for Religious Authenticity and Halachic Courage. This book is really very fascinating. It showcases Judaism as a religion of rebellion, as an ideology of rebellion against the norms of maybe materialistic society, of the norms which humans fall in, of the traps which humans fall into. It's a rebellion against those trappings. So in this book, in Jewish Law as Rebellion, you show that the Torah not only outlines laws, but also sparks a rebellion against these prevailing norms. So the Jews believe in the revelation at Har Sinai, at Mount of Sinai. So how does the revelation at Sinai establish this rebellious spirit, Rabbi Cardozo, and what implications does it have for Judaism's mission, both historically and today?
Yeah, these are very important and serious questions. Let me start by saying that the very idea that God revealed himself, or better, his will, to a people a few thousand years ago is in itself a very revolutionary concept. God enters history, let's say, while until that moment that was not so clear. Suddenly he is there among the people. According to the Jewish tradition, there are about 2 million people standing around the mountain Sinai, where then God openly reveals himself and says who he is. This is most remarkable. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion about that. Did that really happen, yes or no? And most people always say something like, it can't have happened because something like that has never happened afterwards. So this belongs to some kind of storytelling, but that is not really true. And I disagree with that, not because I can prove that it happened. It can either be proved that it did not happen. What people very often do not think about is that the fact that something never happened before is not at all a proof whether or not it happened. Because the same thing is true about human beings. Every human being is a complete new surprise, if that's the right word, in the sense that there's nobody who lives your life or who is like you. Every human being throughout the thousands or perhaps millions of years is a complete surprise and something very different, of which no second exists. So therefore, as much as that is possible with human beings, why would that not be possible in the case when God comes and makes himself available to the people? Once more, this is not a proof, but I just make that observation because very often people fall victim to the fact that if something didn't happen and has not happened since, it can't happen. That's not true because the human being himself proves that that is not true. Somebody once wrote, every child born is a surprise to his parents because nobody knows beforehand how this child will work out and what this child is going to be. And that means that surprise is all the time there within human existence and experience. And that also means that therefore something else, which is a total surprise, like the revelation at Sinai, could for that reason quite well have happened. We rely on historical evidence. I don't know to what extent that really works, but it at least has good reason to make this particular claim. But then, as you mentioned before, I think that the Jewish tradition is indeed a protest movement. The first Jew, Abraham, is a protester. I once said he was the first Protestant. He's the first protester because he's the first person who stood up and said, I disagree. And this has become the foundation of the whole of the Jewish tradition. Today we have many things which we have already inherited from the Jewish tradition via Christianity, perhaps the Islam and Western civilization, but we must understand that a long time ago there was nothing of that at all available. It was completely new. All men are created in the image of God. There is a God that in itself is a completely surprising kind of claim to make which didn't exist. We today are used to it only because of the Jewish tradition. So there are many things which are new within the Jewish tradition. We over the years got used to it because the Jewish tradition infiltrated in many different societies and different religions. But it all starts with a protest. First of all, a protest against Avodah Zarah, against idol worship. This is one of the major issues in the Bible, in the Tanakh. And the Torah and the whole of Tanakh, the whole of the Bible is full of fighting this idea that there is more than one deity, or that these deities are human-like in the sense that they have needs and so on, while the Jewish tradition claims that there's nothing true of that within the Jewish tradition concerning God. But God at the same time is being made available to man via the text of the Torah in human terminology. So therefore we speak about God having legs or having ears or whatever it is, but it is purely a symbolic way of making it available to us. Otherwise we would not be able to understand anything about God. Who God is stays a complete puzzle. Nobody really knows the answer to it. But this is the claim which the Jewish tradition makes, which is a major claim running against everything at the time, what people believed at that time. And then you have institutions within the Jewish tradition, such as Shabbat, a day where you cannot work. And work does not here mean to just get tired, but it is a day when we, in terms of today, we put technology at the side. Our computers, our cars, and other technological great things as such, but we must be very carefully that we don't get enslaved by them. So once in a week, the Torah says basically already several thousand years ago, put this aside for one day, so you can open your mind still to other dimensions of human existence, which you have no time for in the weekdays. So you have 24 hours, 26 hours on Shabbat to do this. And therefore Shabbat became an incredibly important experience within the Jewish tradition. And later on it was taken over as a kind of a Sunday, although it is not exactly the same thing in Christianity and Islam on Friday, but it is a revolutionary concept. That man has got freedom of will is a completely revolutionary concept. That man can do teshuvah, that he can repent again for what he did wrong, is a revolutionary concept. I could go through step by step through the whole of the Torah, and every few pesukim, verses, will again introduce another rebellious idea. And that is the reason why I called this book by that name, because I really believe that the basics for this is a rebellious outlook. And that we need to be very proud about that, because it is not commonplace. It is not something where we say, okay, I already know this. No, this was absolutely revolutionary at the time. So, yes, this is important. There is an interesting observation which I once wrote about by the Buddha in the Far East, where he says this is very remarkable. mountains only walk. What does that mean? Mountains only walk. So the answer to that is there is one specific reason why mountains exist, and that is to be mountains. And the walking here means to say, like you and I walk, we take a walk, doesn't mean to say we are going anywhere specifically. It's not an address. It is the walking itself is who I am. I'm carrying myself. And that is what happens on Shabbat. I carry myself. I do away a little bit with the world around me. I focus on my family, on my friends, on my students, on myself. And I walk with myself instead of walking with a package which I have to bring somewhere else. That I do in the weekdays. And by the way, this is the reason why, according to the Jewish tradition, and I'm sure you know about that, we are actually not allowed to carry on Shabbat in the public domain. Today we can do that under specific circumstances, but the idea is that you don't carry anything which is external of yourself, but you carry yourself. For one moment you focus on who am I? I am not a haver, but I'm a being, and I am a becomer. I have to grow in my world. I have people around me to help me, and that is the major focus of what Shabbat is all about. And this again is revolutionary from every perspective. Same is true about kashrut. Same is true about kashrut, about the food which we eat. We don't just put everything in our mouths, because food has also become an absolute obsession with man. And the same is true with sexuality. So therefore there are laws in the Torah which tell us, okay, everything is fine, but you have to keep it under control. And therefore there are many laws there concerning sexuality and concerning what we eat, which we should be careful about. Everything is an art in this world, even eating food.
Wow. Rabbi Cardozo, that reminds me of some of the spirit I saw in the book, which really reframed Judaism completely for me. I think that to address a few of the points you made, many of us growing up, Judaism is sort of the religion of the OCDer. You know, you have to make sure everything is meticulous a certain way, tie your right shoe first. It's not really living for the sake of sanctification. It's living for the sake of conformity. And it is almost antagonistic to the spirit of the founder of Judaism, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu. The concepts of teshuvah, of repentance, kashrut, Shabbat, these are all rebellions against the norm, in my view as well. They really, the concept of one deity is revolutionary. You know, free will nowadays is becoming a hot topic. People believe more in determinism now, but it's the same thing as the people who believe that the gods controlled your fate. And Judaism is the art form which shows you how you actually do have free will, and your actions matter, and you know they are something you are held accountable for, and that's a beautiful thing. I think that nowadays, you mentioned in the beginning that the revelation at Sinai people doubt because it never happened before, and you say that every single human being hasn't happened before, right? To the scientific mind, I think this is a concept that people can't wrap their head around because we're so used to statistics and lumping people together. But the truth is that every single human being is a snowflake, right? It's no two snowflakes are alike, as they say. I know that term is a little bit taboo these days, but you know, it's
right. You're right.
This is just a beautiful way of looking at it.
The pity is that also the Jewish tradition itself somehow lost its message. We always say that sexuality is to blame for why people are not religious, but the truth about it is it is religion itself which is at fault here, because it stopped teaching these ideas. It became all conformity, it all became mediocre, and therefore it lost its inspiration and its relevance to modern man. And one has to reintroduce this into our society, because what religion really has to say is something extremely important, but we lost somewhere the very message which is trying to tell us. And we have to write and speak about this, because it is the only way how to understand that life without constantly being aware how special and unique it is nearly not worthwhile living. It's only when you live in surprise, in amazement, that you can really fully live your life.
Of course, this is a realization that once you hear it, you sort of can't unhear it. And I think on that note, the Torah about religion nowadays being sort of losing its own message. The Torah today is often seen as a static and unchanging document. In the book, you echo this notion by writing that a spirit of finalization has taken over Judaism, and that halachic living has become self-defeating for many of us. It actually encourages what it wishes to prevent, observing halakha by rote and failing to see the extraordinary. It almost seems as you mentioned, it almost seems as if the rebellious and forward-moving Sinai moment is at odds with modern Judaism as it is lived in many communities today. How do you think we can find our way back to the idea of a rebellious Torah that adapts to the historical challenges faced by the Jewish people and the minutiae of daily living?
I think we have to start all over again. And that is, I think, the very foundation of the Jewish tradition, actually of all religion, is to be amazed, to stand in awe. Because if you start to think about the world and about nature, about the universe and so on, and you realize that all of this is completely something which is totally overtaking us and is overwhelming, if you really understand what's going on over there, then you stand in awe. It is like you're saying, wow, how is it that there is life? How is it that there is a universe? How is it that a little insect walks over there and is able to do whatever it needs to do, which is beyond our understanding? Because I think what happened in our modern world since the Renaissance, and perhaps even before that, is that people believe that science explains why the world is there, and why the universe is there, and why the sun goes up in the morning and goes under in the evening. The truth about it is that science only does one thing, which is extremely important. It tells us what happens and how it happens. But it does not give us any information of why it happens. The why is totally beyond us. We keep on being surprised. And since we have in our school system not emphasized that point, but only speak about the why, about the how and about what, and not about the why, we have moved the question of why to the side. We don't want to speak about it, probably because we have to admit that we don't know. And we want science to have the last word in everything, but science has no last word in everything. That is neither the whole purpose of science. Science is there to tell us what happened and how it happens. But religion comes in the moment that you start to ask the question, why does it at all happen? Why is there a universe? This has badly enough been moved aside, as I said before, in our education. I once wrote, and I will soon write again, an article by saying what we have to introduce in our university is a faculty of awe, of teaching people to live in awe, to stand in awe. The scientist, when he comes and teaches his students all the great and important information of science, he should first say for 5 minutes, before we do that, let's have a look to this world and to the universe. I feel that one of the biggest problems which we have today in education is that the most important thing which makes man very special, is the faculty of awe, in the sense of his capability to stand in awe, and that we have to reintroduce that in our educational system, which until this day we haven't done. It seems that universities many hundreds of years ago did do that, but it has been lost. And therefore, many people walk around believing that everything is normal. The truth about it is there is nothing normal about normality. Everything is a surprise. Everything is a matter and a reason to be amazed. And once you understand that, and then you ask the second question, what am I going to do with that amazement? It's not just standing there and say, wow, but also how am I going to introduce that into my day-to-day life? You start to understand what the meaning of religion is all about, because that is the purpose of religion. How do I live with awe? How do I live with amazement? How do I live with surprise? And the Jewish tradition says that the way how to do that is to live in according to the commandments, if we understand these commandments correctly. And every commandment in itself is basically saying, so is it possible? This is the way how to live with amazement. Even the smallest trivialities of life are really unbelievable. And we take it all for granted.
Right.
And the truth about it is we should not take anything for granted, because nothing is normal by the normal standards which we like to make use of.
I completely agree. I think that there's this quote by a scientist or a theologian. If I remember who wrote it, I will put it up later when this is posted. But he essentially said that in the modern world, we look at science and we believe that it answers all the questions. But as far as we've advanced from the ancients had the honesty to realize that just because we know we can observe something and how it works, we have no idea why it works that way. And they would sort of move it to the gods. But
Yep.
we say that there's something that God wants us to learn from the process, and there's the wisdom of God is present in the process, and we have to figure out why. And that's where religion comes in, and living in this awe and amazement.
And I would add to that there is, in the Jewish tradition, the answer to the question, how do I live with amazement, with awe, is by using the human deed. And in doing the deed, I start to hear what's going on. As long as I believe something, I don't have to give it much attention. The moment I live it, my whole being lives it by doing something which is making me aware how much I should stand in awe. The religious tradition comes alive. Take one example, which is a very obvious example, and I write about this in this book you just mentioned. When we make a bracha, when we make a blessing, we say for everything a blessing. For what we eat, for what we drink, for what we smell, what we see. So what is the purpose behind that? The purpose is that before I eat an apple, I have to realize that eating the apple is an amazing experience, which is absolutely not understandable in purely scientific terms, because I know exactly what happens when I eat it. But why it works the way it works in my body, I don't really know. I know more and more about what happens, how it happens, but I know little, if anything, about why it happens. So before we take an apple into our mouth and eat it, we say only one thing: wow. And how do you say this in Hebrew? You say this in Hebrew by saying Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Borei Peri Hagafen, meaning to say, I make an observation here that I should not take the apple or anything else for granted, and therefore I need to say first, wow, unbelievable that this is possible. And that gives you a whole different dimension of how to look to life, at life.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think that's such a great way of looking at it. Obviously, this is totally different than the way that people are raised to say brachot, to say blessings. It's just something you're obligated to do. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it, like there's going to be that pang head that says like, oh, I didn't do this and I should have done that. But really, it's about living with your whole being and appreciating the minutia of life. And that's such a brilliant way to look at it. And you mentioned in the beginning that how do we go back to the spirit of rebellious living, of living in awe? So you said we should start all over in some sense. I can imagine and I can infer that you don't mean to rewrite the Torah. I think that would be obviously not what we're talking about here. So given that we view the Torah as divine, right? This is something that should perturb us nowadays. How do we approach passages in the Torah that appear morally challenging by today's standards, right? So if we want to restart, but we want to keep the Torah and its integrity and its unbroken chain of tradition, how do we do that? How can we maintain confidence in our observance while also reinterpreting parts that might no longer seem applicable?
Yeah, this is a very profound question about which there is a lot to say, but I will make one or two observations about it. That's the way how I see it. And there are also ways of looking at it as well. If you look at the world, you see that there are many things wrong in our world. In our little globe, we have earthquakes, we have tsunamis, we have all sorts of things where the laws of nature don't work well, or perhaps they work too well, and therefore they create chaos and disaster and things like that. So what is the point of having a world which is not perfect? First of all, it is like this. There was a very famous British, or is a famous British philosopher, non-Jewish, John Hick, who made the important point, and that is that when we look to the world and we say it should be a paradise, what we are really saying is it should be a terrible place. Because if the world is a paradise, everything would be fine. If everything is fine, nothing can go wrong. If nothing can go wrong, you and I can't do to each other any help or give any help to each other because we are fine without it. Meaning that the relationship between human beings would fall away because I don't need you, you don't need me. Because the world is not such a great place, I need you, you need me, and many other people need us. If the world, John Hick gives as an example, would exist and be a paradise, and somebody would fall from a tower, it can't be that anything will happen to that person. Why? Because it is the paradise. And in the paradise, this person will come down on his feet and he will be fine and walk off. If I rob a bank, then nothing will happen because a moment later the money is back there again because it's the paradise. Anything I do which does not need to be done anymore becomes meaningless. So the world by definition needs to have problems because it's the problem which challenges the human being to step out of his little world, help also people, or for example, in the case of a tsunami or in the case of an earthquake, we need to use all our scientific knowledge to try to overcome an earthquake and overcome a tsunami. And by that, in according to the Jewish tradition at least, we become partners with God in the creation. God says, here is a world not so good. It is your important purpose of existence that you make it a better place. This is a fundamental point in all human existence. If everything would be fine, then it would be terrible because what are we going to do with this world? Everything is fine already. I don't need anymore to be a partner with God in this world. I think the same thing is true. This may be a little difficult to understand with some of the commandments. There are commandments in the Torah which are not fair, which are not correct. For example, the law of the mamzer, the child which is born out of a marriage, which is forbidden by Jewish law. A woman having an adulterous relationship with a man. The child being born out of that relationship is a mamzer, and a mamzer is a child which can't just get married to everybody. There are many limitations on that person. Or, for example, the case of the aguna, that is the woman who is not divorced from her husband, but her husband is not prepared to divorce her, so she can't get married. There are few cases like that, which are no doubt unfair. I think that the whole purpose, and which I also discuss in this book you just mentioned, the whole purpose is that the rabbis have to come and step in and say, just like in the case of the tsunami and in the case of the earthquake, we need to step in here to rectify what is wrong with these laws. Because in that way, we become a co-creator with God in the Torah. So my point of view is that the Torah itself, or if you want, God gave these laws, basically telling us, so what are you going to do about this? I made you a problem. How are you going to solve it? So it needs to be solved. The problem is that it does not always get solved. And that is a pity, because that is not the purpose. It should not stay unsolved. It should get solved. And there are mechanisms within the Halakha to be able to do that, which, by the way, I explain in great length in this book. Everything can be put straight, but the challenge to put it straight is exactly what people and the sages of Israel should be all about. But again, there are problems because it does not always happen, which is the same reason which we mentioned before concerning religion in general. So I have another dimension to this, and that is that if today the Torah would be given again by God, it probably would hold a different text than the one which we have from a few thousand years ago. Not because the few thousand years ago the Torah was not given by God, but it was given at that time, at that moment, in according to the conditions of that moment. People walking around in the desert, people who just got out of Egypt. That's not our situation today anymore. So in case God would have given another Torah, he probably would have updated that Torah. Is a dangerous word, but he would have updated the Torah and say, okay, this is now how I want you to live. But instead, he did something very clever, if I may say so. And that God said, I'm not going to do this. You are going to do that. You, the sages of Israel, the human being, you are going to put me in my place and say, this is not fair. We don't accept this. And we will change it. And as the sages did, they changed it. They have done
Yeah,
away with the commandments.
the way that the Chachamim have gotten, I think that you pointed out in your book many times, but also reading the Talmud, you sort of notice the radical ways that the Chachamim approach the case of, for example, the Ben Sorer More, like completely, doing away with that.
Right.
It's something that needs to be done by the religious leaders of the time, and I think that if I may, sometimes religious leaders get stuck on preserving the greatness of previous figures rather than preserving the spirit with which the previous figures looked at the Torah. And I think that's something that is being addressed in this generation. I think that we're seeing a lot of that. So thank you for pointing that out. I guess that to move on to the next question, rebelling against the poor cultural norms, which is the spirit of rebellion in Judaism, it's exciting. But today, many of us question the relevance of the Torah. We're wondering if we might achieve ethical progress without the Torah. Considering this, why should a Jew commit to a life centered around Torah observance? What makes it uniquely compelling to treat the Torah as divine rather than simply a cultural or ethical guide?
Yeah, also a very important question. Let me discuss two possibilities here, and that is this. When we say that our cultural, ethical foundations of today's world, we no longer need the Torah because we can do it on our own. The question, first of all, is that true? After a Holocaust, the big question is man able to stand on his own feet, basically morally to stand on his own feet? We may very well have moral ideas, but when it comes to applying them, we can see how much human beings and whole generation in the 20th century has completely gone beyond what humanly, morally was possible, and created the greatest disaster which ever happened in human history, especially in Jewish history. So, number one, the question is, do we really have the ethical power within ourselves to do that? If not, that from outside, a voice needs to speak to us and say, you can't do this. Everything can be justified. You can justify the Holocaust as well. If you have a certain look at the Jews, which the Germans had, they would justify it, as Hitler does in his Mein Kampf. That's dangerous stuff. And therefore, sometimes there's a need that a voice from outside says, this is unacceptable. But I would argue more than that. According to the Jewish tradition, the reason why you and I and all of us have a moral inner feeling about certain things are right and certain things are wrong, from where does that come? How do we get to that sort of thing? So it was already Immanuel Kant, a famous German philosopher, who said that inner moral voice of us is something with which we are born. It is a categorical imperative, as he calls it. It is something which we carry it with us. And the Jewish tradition would say that what we carry with us, this voice, is really the voice of the Torah. It is not so much that the voice comes from outside at Sinai. Sinai reminds us of what is happening really within us. That is also a way of looking to the question whether or not man could stand on his own feet when it comes to morality. And then there is also a way which is closely related to it, but it's not completely similar and identical. And that is that what Carl Gustav Jung, one of the great psychiatrists, called the archetype. We over the years, certain value systems have been developed within the human being, call it his DNA. And this slowly but surely became how we today feel about certain things, what is right and what is wrong. But again, the question there is, could we have done this on our own? Or is it because our forefathers a long time ago started the process of making sure that one day we will accept that as a moral value? Moral values are a very big problem also because of another reason. There are moral values which completely clash with each other, and where you have to have an answer. And we, from a secular point of view, we really don't have an answer. Jewish tradition at a certain moment says this is the answer, not because you can completely explain it, but because you need to have an answer. You can't stay with a question. I'll give you one example. What are you going to do when the only way how you can make sure that mankind will survive is by killing half of its citizens? Because you have only so much food for so many people. If you don't kill anybody, everybody will die. If you kill half of the people, then you can save the other half of the people. This is a moral problem which has been discussed by many Jewish and non-Jewish philosophers, which needs an answer. So Jewish tradition walks in and says, here's an answer. Do you agree with it? Perhaps not. But we need to give an answer to these questions because you can't stay in the air. It is not giving and not making a decision is also a decision. So you have to come up with certain moral qualities and say, this is the way how we look to it. I doubt very greatly if man can stand on his own feet when it comes to morality and ethics. But I do believe that much of the ethics which we have today in our days is rooted within Torah values.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair assessment that many people, I guess because of the non-popularity of Judaism, like the fact that it's a Jewish tradition for Jews, many people won't see it that way. But the Jewish mission is sort of like to guide an ethical progress forward, which can be found in other places. So I think it's interesting you mentioned that we need this sort of divine background because maybe man can't stand on his own 2 feet, And when it came to the regime of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, people say on both sides of the spectrum, they say it was because it was an atheist society, and an atheist will say like no, they worked closely with religious figures, and another famous atheist comment is that only religion can make people do such evil things. But the truth is that having that framework, having the framework of God and divinity, also pushes people who would otherwise remain silent in the face of hopelessness to really do something about it. So it's like everything else in this world. You can use it for good or bad, and I think that having that extra authoritative source of morality, or at least the knowledge of it, despite the fact that we can't understand it to come fully, and we can debate about it, whether we like the answer or not, like you mentioned, is a way to approach the utility of having the Torah and keeping it because of its divine power this way. I don't know what you think about that, but that's sort of what I gathered from what you said.
I would agree. The Elie Wiesel once made the observation: the opposite of evil, opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of God is indifference. People have become indifferent. I don't care anymore. And that is perhaps worse than evil, because indifferent means to say, it doesn't matter to me, I'm okay. What happens to the other person is of no importance to me. And the Jewish tradition strongly objects against that. But let me be clear, I also believe that certain things within the halachic system, as I discuss in this book, need to be updated. Now, there's a very dangerous word to say updated, because it doesn't mean to say we can just create new laws. But there is such a concept as the metaphysics of Halakha, which means to say we look in a Halakha, we try to understand what its motivation is. And then when we see that today we need to apply it differently than we did it a few hundred years or 1,000 years ago, we may need to do that. And that is not always enough done.
Yeah, definitely. Apologies. To extract the spirit of the halacha from the halacha is a worthy endeavor.
That's right. Very true.
And if I may, I like to end all of these. Thank you for everything you've mentioned so far. I think it's such a great way to frame a perspective of Judaism. I like to end all of these conversations, after we've delved into all these topics, with a shift from sort of the abstract armchair of philosophy, as people call it, into the pragmatic. So, Rabbi Cardozo, if you could encourage Jews worldwide to adopt just one new practice or mindset in their daily Jewish life, what would it be and why?
It would be what I just said before. I would love to teach them, or that they can be taught to stand in awe. As long as we don't do that, we are off the track. If we start to teach our children that they should stand in amazement, they should stand in wonder, then you have a chance that they will say, the Jewish tradition responds to my need to stand in wonder and how to do that. That is where I would start. How to teach that is a long and difficult story. But again, the Jewish tradition says that the way how to do that is not just to teach your child to stand in awe when he looks to the sunset, but also ask him, so what are you going to do about this? How are you going to use this tomorrow morning when the sun is no longer there? What will you do to make yourself aware that you really should be surprised about everything? One of the things is our tefillot, also our prayers, because prayer is really a way to make people aware and to wake them up to be surprised. It's not so much that we're asking God for doing this for us or that for us, but it is saying to ourselves, wow. Prayer is there to make us more aware of the wow.
If I may end this with the one word, it would be wow. That's a great way to look at it. Rabbi Cardozo, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. I think a lot of people can gain a lot from this conversation, and I will link in the description to your website. I will link to the book Jewish Law's Rebellion and to your set of books on Amazon as well. Is there, if there's anything else you want to plug and let people know about, please do so. I'd be happy to link it in the description as well.
Well, for now, I've said what I need to say. Perhaps later on, also things will come to my mind, and I will find a way how to do that.
Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Philosophical Jew podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I have spent many months creating Philosophical Jew, but nearly a decade preparing for it. In addition to the Philosophical Jew podcast, there is also a Substack. The Substack is a platform I use to write on various topics in Jewish and regular thought in the world, topics such as philosophy and theology primarily. If this interests you, check it out at philosophicaljew.substack.com. Additionally, you can find me on Instagram at a philosophical Jew, and on X as a philosophical Jew, and on Spotify for the audio versions, and on YouTube for the video versions of the podcasts. Occasionally, I do reaction videos, and have a few more coming up. If you enjoyed this content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Have an amazing day.